This is Walter White, a chemistry teacher who's just hit his 50s. We're gonna see how he went from being an old, useless high school teacher to one of the biggest drug lords in the United States. So this is Walter White. He has a settled life with his wife and his disabled son. To make it short, he's kind of the guy everyone teases because he's super discreet, has never done anything dangerous in his life, and doesn't impose his presence, simply put. He doesn't have much money, and his job as a teacher isn't enough to make ends meet. But one day, Walter collapses and dies. I hope you enjoyed the video. Big kisses. Bye-bye. Just kidding. He's taken to the hospital, and it's discovered that he has an incurable lung cancer. In his mind, something clicks. He wants to start living his life for real, without fearing the future, because there simply won't be a tomorrow. Among the crazy things he does, he starts by asking his brother-in-law, who's a cop, to take him to a police raid on a drug lab. He stays in the car to watch from afar, but notices some movement next to him. One of his former students is running away. He realizes it's Captain Cook, the dealer the police are looking for. He doesn't report him, and that very evening decides to track him down. And our Walter is so crazy that he offers him a deal. As a chemistry teacher, he knows how to make substances. He's a real pro. He knows he's capable of making high-quality methamphetamine. Captain Cook, whose real name is Jesse Pinkman, agrees to work together. In fact, he's doing this mostly for his family. Because of his cancer, he risks dying, and with this new venture, he'll make a lot of money fast to secure his wife and son for when he's gone. So in short, Walter buys a camper van in which he makes meth so perfect that even Jesse is shocked. He's sure he'll be able to sell this new product for a very good price. But some guys who worked with Jesse Pinkman decide to go after Walt and Jesse because they think they're working with the police. Walter manages to neutralize them. As a result, he ends up with a dead body and a prisoner. They want to get rid of the body so they're never found. The professor, Walter White, has a solution. He wants to use very powerful acid to dissolve the body, so he asks Jesse to buy large plastic bins because the acid doesn't attack plastic, simply put. But Jesse, not finding what he needs, decides to put the body in his bathtub and pour the acid. Except the acid attacks the ceramic, and as a result, the bathtub and the rest of the body fall through the floor of the room. They didn't clean it up after. Walter realizes what he's becoming, a criminal. He decides to release the prisoner because after talking to him, he thinks he won't do anything to him. But then he notices that a piece of broken plate is missing because the prisoner had broken the plate. The prisoner tries to kill Walt, who strangles and kills him. So to sum it up, Walter, the nice chemistry teacher, makes drugs and has already killed 2 people. Okay, Jesse in turn realizes that what he's doing is really intense. Initially, he's not a bad guy, just a poor soul who sells and uses. In itself, he's not a murderer, so he wants to quit, but his friends push him to continue because, yes, his friends sell some drugs for him so they can make money, consume more, etc. Walt does everything to stay away from this business because his cancer is getting worse. Since he knows he's going to die, he prefers to stay with his family as much as possible and not end up in prison if he gets caught. So, although he didn't want to do chemistry to avoid becoming a vegetable, he eventually agrees because I didn't mention it, but his wife is pregnant. He still wants a chance to see his daughter one day because at the time our story takes place, chemotherapy and cancer treatments were only in their infancy, but these treatments cost a lot of money and he simply doesn't have that money. Well, yeah, the healthcare system in the US is you pay or you die. So all of these things push our professor to take action. Walter goes back to see Jesse to get their business going again. Jesse wasn't able to make meth as good as before, so Walter decides to accept his partner back. Walt gets back to work and works wonders. His meth is of such perfect quality that it has never been matched in the United States. In fact, the police, where Walt's brother-in-law works, are onto a new lab. Of course, it's Walter's lab. The brother-in-law even goes to Walt's high school and inventories his chemistry equipment. He notices some things are missing. A man is arrested for drug possession. Our hero is not implicated. What's quite funny is that the brother-in-law keeps making jokes like, "Walt, I know you're the new drug manufacturer, but no, I'm just kidding. You'd be way too weak to do such things." Anyway, subscribe. Because of his cancer, the professor goes on sick leave. This gives him a bit more time to cook and handle his little affairs. Meanwhile, Jesse finds a new buyer who steals everything, the merchandise and the shipment gone. To get revenge, Walt goes to visit this villain and uses explosive packages to threaten him. They eventually come to an agreement. The guy will buy 1 kilogram of meth per week for about $35,000, which is a lot. My YouTube channel makes a lot less money and my videos are expensive to produce. If you subscribe, you'll prevent a guy like me from selling drugs. Now that they have to produce a huge amount of meth, the two of them need ingredients. But Jesse can't bring everything on his own because Walter needs a very special ingredient. He goes to steal it from a warehouse. And honestly, the scene is really goofy because they're just two clowns trying to steal barrels. Anyway, it doesn't make sense. From then on, they've got what they need to supply the buyer in very large quantities every week. Our two pals make between $35,000 and $40,000 a week. But one day, the buyer completely loses it and kills one of his guys. From then on, our two friends are really scared they're going to get killed too, since they've witnessed the murder. That evening, Jesse and the professor get trapped by the bad guy who quickly kidnaps them. The brother-in-law is made aware of Walt's sudden disappearance. He discovers that Walt might have a secondary phone and that he might have a connection with Jesse Pinkman. And sure enough, we find our two pals in a house in the middle of the desert under the watch of the boss and his old uncle. Walt and Jesse try to poison their captor, but it doesn't work. The old uncle, who can't talk, stops his nephew from eating the poisoned dish. The boss then realizes they tried to trick him. He's about to kill them when Pinkman manages to steal his weapon and shoot him. They manage to run a bit farther and hide. And guess who shows up? Walt's brother-in-law. He finds the boss covered in blood and the two exchange gunfire. Our bad guy ends up dying. As for the duo, they run off, so the brother-in-law, who I remind you is part of the police, doesn't find them. In the end, our favorite duo manages to get back in without incident. Walter pretends to be amnesiac. He's taken in and brought to the hospital. As for Jesse, he pretends he partied all weekend. Neither Walt's family nor the police suspect anything, and no link is made between Walter and Jesse. However, Jesse's parents find out that he's making drugs in the house he lives in, so they decide to kick him out because, yes, Jesse was living in his deceased aunt's house. He has no choice but to accept, otherwise his own parents will turn him in. This marks the start of his descent into hell. The police have taken all the money he earned from selling meth. He has no more means. His camper van falls apart and he's forced to steal it back from the mechanic to get by. On Walter's side, his wife is very angry and won't speak to him. She seems to know something about Walter's secret life, but doesn't want to say anything. In fact, she simply thinks that Walter is cheating on her with another woman. Eventually, our chemist gives some money to Jesse, who can now start to recover. He finds a new place to live, and together, they restart the production. This time, they don't want to deal with an intermediary. They want to sell the stock themselves, so Jesse calls on his friends to sell on the street. They industrialize the drug trade in a way to maximize profit. Their only costs are the price of raw materials and a small percentage for Jesse's street vendors, and that's it. The only issue is that one day, one of the vendors gets set up by junkies who steal a dose. In itself, it's not a big deal, but if word gets out, things like this could happen again. In the street trade, you have to be respected, or else it's over for you. Jesse wants to let it slide, but Walter insists they take action. It's as though he's pushing him down the path of evil. On one hand, he's thinking business and loss, but on the other hand, he's starting to act like the bad boss from the beginning who almost killed them. So Jesse shows up at the two junkies' house, and it's a bit of a mess. Our guy gets beaten up, and in the end, the woman kills her husband by crushing him under a post to retrieve the stash they stole earlier. Jesse gets his money back and calls the police before running away. Although Jesse now has a reputation as a violent and cruel person, the police are still interested in the meth trade. Oh, I forgot to mention that everyone thinks it was Walter's partner who killed the junkie's husband by crushing his head. This gives Jesse a lot of street credit, and now he's seen as a drug dealer who shouldn't be messed with, or else there will be very serious consequences. Anyway, one day, one of the vendors gets caught by the police. To help him, our two friends turn to Saul Goodman. By the way, if you have legal problems, whether you're guilty or not, don't hesitate to call Saul Goodman. For him, all citizens are innocent, and he'll get you out of any mess. It would have been so funny if I were sponsored by this guy for real, but since I don't have any sponsors for this video, subscribe and give me ideas for series, movies, or even theories that I could do for the next videos, simply. Anyway, Saul Goodman offers them a plan. Deliver the mastermind of the operation. Don't worry, they're not going to deliver Walter White, but a guy who agrees to go to jail for money. Plus, he looks a bit like Walter. They set up the fake mastermind. The seller is released without going to prison. Saul Goodman, what a handsome guy. Walter and his family learn that his cancer is in remission. It's great news. White is still not out of trouble, but he has a bit more time ahead of him. Death won't come in 1 or 2 weeks like he thought. However, one of Jesse's guys gets killed in the street by competitors. The result is clear. Jesse's vendors all stop because they're afraid they'll be killed. The problem is, our two pals had produced a massive amount of meth a while back because White was afraid his cancer would completely take him down, when in fact, everything is fine. So he's left with several kilos of drugs on his hands. They talk to Saul Goodman about it, who is a bit of their advisor, even in shady situations. He tells them they need to go through a businessman, a real one, not a mafia boss like the crazy guy who tried to kill them, but someone who would handle everything like a real company, with order and discipline. Let me introduce you to Gustavo, known as Gus. Remember his name because we're talking about one of the most iconic characters in Breaking Bad. Please note, Walter is instructed to drop the merchandise at a very specific highway rest stop within a tight time frame, but trouble keeps piling up. First of all, Jesse is on a trip and can barely say where the goods are hidden. While Walter retrieves it, he receives a message. His wife is in labor. It's a huge dilemma, but the business choice prevails. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar deal. Fortunately, our hero arrives just in time and receives the money. He refuses to give Jesse his share because he doesn't want him to use it for drugs. Before, Jesse only used to smoke stuff, but in the meantime, he met a girl who introduced him to heroin. It's much harsher and more devastating, and that's why Jesse couldn't help Walter earlier. Eventually, he agrees to give him his share. The two partners are ready to quit drugs and live their lives fully with all the money, but to mark their new life, they decide to use drugs just one last time. At that moment, Walter wants to talk to Jesse, but discovers the two lovers lying on the bed, completely shot up. Jesse pushes the girl, who turns on her back and starts to vomit. She chokes in front of our hero, who doesn't intervene. He watches coldly as Jesse's girlfriend dies. He considers it a necessary evil since it'll make Jesse stop using heroin. Anyway, thanks to Saul Goodman, Walter manages to launder the drug money. Because of this, he gets surgery. Everything seems to be going well, but his wife discovers the lies one after another. She finds out that no one financed the treatments. Walt, as he had told her, never went to visit his mother, etc. It starts to add up. In fact, it adds up so much that she gives him an ultimatum to leave the house. Now that they have a new baby, she no longer wants a man who constantly lies to her. She even threatens to divorce him. Walter had then made methamphetamine, explaining the large amount of money that came out of nowhere. Although he apologizes and promises not to do it again, his wife doesn't want to hear any of it. Walter has no choice but to move out. He takes a new apartment where he can house Jesse. Gus meets with him again and offers him $3 million for 3 months of work, which Walt refuses because he wants to retire for good. He hopes it's not completely over with his wife. Sure, he's made a lot of money, but with the threat of divorce, he doesn't want to risk losing everything, because if that happens, all of this will have been for nothing. Walt's brother-in-law, who is still in the police force, has increasingly accurate leads on the high-quality methamphetamine case. In fact, he has the person he's been looking for right in front of his eyes because it's Walt, but he doesn't know it's Walt. And just so you know, Walt and Jesse no longer work together, and Jesse is making his own meth on the side, but Gus pays both of them, even though only Jesse worked this time. Essentially, Gus's goal is to make the two of them clash so that in a way they'll be manipulated into working together again. Anyway, Gus, who senses a good opportunity, shows Walter a brand new state-of-the-art lab. His offer of $3 million still stands. After separating from Jesse, Walter accepts the offer. Jesse and Walter eventually reconcile and are now partners again, working for Gus. They'll split the profits 50-50, which means over $1 million each. Walt's brother-in-law comes close to dying while facing off against two Mexicans who came to avenge the death of the first boss. The brother-in-law is fine, but he's hospitalized, and the medical bills are enormous, so Skylar, Walt's wife, decides to pay all his expenses. In fact, she explains the large amounts of money she's withdrawing by claiming that Walter won a huge amount of money by gambling at casinos, because she understands that by not reporting Walt, she has, in a way, become his accomplice. So she tries to help her husband launder the money he earns. She doesn't trust Saul Goodman's abilities. She's even ready to buy a car wash business to take charge of it and launder the money herself. Although she doesn't approve of what her husband is doing, she does everything to help him. She's more focused on profiting from the whole situation. I should point out that all of this is happening while they are in the middle of a semi-divorce. The more she learns, the more she oddly wants to help Walt. However, she still can't bring herself to fully divorce him. Now that she knows the truth, she understands part of it, but isn't ready to forgive him yet. I don't know if you remember the incident with the assassination of one of Jesse's dealers. Initially, it was one of Gus's guys who had hired a kid to kill the guy. Jesse finds out about it and wants to kill the two men involved, but Gus gathers everyone to make peace. It's agreed that the kid won't be employed anymore, and they all shake hands. But the next evening, we discover that the same kid has been assassinated. Jesse, furious, wants revenge. He's about to kill the two responsible, but Walter arrives just in time and kills the two gangsters himself in front of his partner, who is completely shocked. Our chemistry teacher has no more limits. To summarize the situation, Jesse is very attached to children in general because he finds them innocent. So the fact that a child was killed because he was integrated into the drug selling circuit drove him crazy. He wanted to kill the gangsters, but Walter took care of it at the last moment so Jesse wouldn't have blood on his hands. The next day, Gus and Walter have a confrontation. Obviously, Gus knows everything and wants to find Jesse, whom he partly holds responsible, even though it wasn't him who killed the two people. He lets Walter live, pretending that everything is in the past and that the business must continue. Before continuing, I need to clarify something. At the beginning, when Jesse wasn't welcome to cook with Walt in the new lab that Gus had set up for him, it was another guy who was working as Walt's assistant. Gus comes to see this assistant and asks him if he could fully replace Walt, if, as I quote, he were unfortunately to disappear because of his cancer. The assistant says he feels ready. And indeed, Walter knows that he is no longer indispensable to Gus. Two men come to find him in the middle of the night and are about to kill him, but our professor managed to warn Jesse, who goes to kill Walter's assistant. This way, Walt becomes indispensable again and won't be killed so soon. But unfortunately, Jesse falls back into drugs and depression after all this because yes, it's the first murder the guy has committed. Fortunately, Gus and one of his henchmen give him real responsibilities so that he feels special and can distance himself from his addiction. Hank is also in depression since he can no longer walk due to his injuries. The guy becomes completely obsessed with minerals to keep himself occupied. One of his police friends gives him some investigative materials so that Hank feels useful and gets out of his depression. He uncovers some very interesting things, particularly a link between Walter's dead assistant, the guy Jesse killed a while back, and the chicken chain Los Pollos Hermanos. But Gus manages to keep himself free of all suspicion each time, although Hank feels that something is off with him. Meanwhile, Gus's meth shipments are being attacked by a Mexican cartel. In fact, we learned that it's a cartel that has been controlling Gus and forcing him to work for them. But Gus wants revenge and plans to destroy the entire cartel and all its members. We learn that they killed a very dear friend of Gus's, and since then, he's been preparing their extermination. Gus poisons all the leaders and main lieutenants, thus wiping out the entire cartel. The last members try to kill Gus, but he's saved just in time by Jesse. Gus rewards his savior by offering him the position Walter held. Meanwhile, Walter is kidnapped and threatened in the middle of the desert. If he involves himself in Gustavo's affairs again, he and his family will be killed. Because yes, now that Jesse is fully operational, he knows exactly how Walter works and how to make high quality meth. That's why Gus no longer needs Walt. This is when our chemistry teacher decides to turn to Saul Goodman to disappear. However, he realizes that his wife has used all his money to give it to her lover, Ted. His last resort is to manipulate Jesse, who is now close to Gus, to kill him. Our two partners team up to prepare the assassination. To put it simply, Walter proves to Jesse that Gus killed a child, and this infuriates Jesse, who then agrees to switch sides and join Walter in killing Gus. It's at the nursing home where the last member of the cartel is located that Gus lets his guard down. He places a bomb that kills the two criminals. That's it, Gustavo Fring is dead. However, this assassination will have huge consequences in the criminal world. First of all, Saul Goodman no longer wants to work with Walt, whom he considers really dangerous. But our chemist refuses to take no for an answer. He threatens Saul Goodman, who then has no choice but to continue working with him. Although with Gus's death, Walter could retire from the business, he doesn't do so because he doesn't have much money left due to medical expenses and the fact that his wife took some of his money. So, our friend does what he does best, with Jesse's help and one of Gus's former men. With Gus's right-hand man gone, the cooking starts up again. The new team manages to steal a very important ingredient being transported on a train without being discovered, but a child witnesses the scene. One of the guys doesn't hesitate to kill him in front of Jesse, who is completely shocked. All of this is witnessed by Skylar, Walt's wife. She understands that now her husband is a real criminal. She has to send their children to live with her sister because she lives in constant fear that one day an enemy of Walter's will come and kill everyone. You know Hank, the brother-in-law who's investigating the case? Well, he's managed to prove Gus's guilt. guilt, which has led to his promotion. He continues his investigation and gets closer and closer to Walter without knowing it. And since we're talking about the wolf, Walter starts having problems with his associates as he's preventing them from leaving. Well, yes, Walter is great at making meth, but he's terrible at selling it. So if his associates leave his business, he'll have nothing to do with his meth. He's holding gold in his hands, but doesn't know how to sell it. The former right-hand man no longer wants to obey and gets killed, while Jesse simply leaves. Walter is forced to work with Todd, another guy from a new group of criminals, but Todd doesn't have Jesse's skills. In the end, we understand that our professor has definitely crossed to the dark side when he pays a gang of neo-Nazis to kill all of Gus's former associates who might know his true identity. He also makes a deal to expand his empire overseas. Now that all the problems are sorted, Walter is making huge amounts of money to the point that he's ready to retire. Skylar understands that her husband is indeed ready to stop, and they reconcile. But then one day, Hank discovers a book that links Walter to the meth trade. He immediately understands that Heisenberg, the drug manufacturer he's been tracking for some time, is none other than his own brother-in-law. The family falls apart, the police officer puts together a case, and as everyone learns the truth, the new drug lord threatens his brother-in-law, who refuses to be intimidated. To make you understand, in fact, he can't yet be arrested because there's no solid proof linking him to the drug trade, but he feels that the end is near. He asks Jesse to use his contacts to disappear. However, Jesse discovers just how much Walter has manipulated him from the start, especially in the case of Gus's murder. He completely loses it and goes straight to the police to deliver as much evidence as possible to take down his former partner. So, we have this weird alliance between Walt's brother-in-law, who is a cop, and Jesse, his former associate. Jesse completely snaps, because as Walter's partner, he could very well go to prison too. After all, he killed a guy, made a lot of drugs, and sold a lot of it, but now he decides to help the police. The two of them come up with a plan to make Walter believe they found his money and are going to burn it. Once again, Walt goes too far by contacting the neo-Nazi militia from earlier to ask them to kill Jesse. In the end, he finds out that his money hasn't been found and he wants to stop what he caused. But it's too late. The militia shows up and the fight begins. Walt's brother-in-law and another cop are killed in the shootout, but the militia decides to capture Jesse instead of killing him. They want to use him to cook meth for their own benefit. Walt then returns home where he tries to convince his wife and son to leave with him and start a new life, but no one wants to go with this criminal. Walt Jr., his son, even calls the police. The only good thing Walter does is call the police himself to inform them that his wife has nothing to do with the whole drug and crime situation. After that, he uses his last contacts to completely disappear and live in seclusion in a cabin. After months and months of solitude and remorse, Walt decides to come out. He wants to end it all, but before doing so, he needs to settle a few things. He forces one of his rich friends to keep his money and give it to his son once he's of age. He then visits his wife one last time. He admits that at some point he wasn't doing this for his family anymore, but purely for his own ego. Walt also decides to finish off the neo-Nazi militia by killing them all. He frees Jesse, who runs far away, but in the fight, he's gravely wounded, he dies before the police arrive, and that's how Breaking Bad ends. And yeah, it really ends badly. Personally, I didn't really like the ending because it's just so dark. Walter's family is completely destroyed. Even though Jesse is finally free, nothing says he'll fare better than before. Anyway, if you're still here, write Walter White in the comments, and I'll reply to you. And if you want more series, feel free to let me know. I was thinking about doing Mission Impossible or The Last of Us for the upcoming series. Anyway, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Big kisses!